Hi, everyone. I'm Nasa Marin, and I'm a young adult librarian at the New York Public Library. I'm delighted to introduce today's Banned Book Club event, which is part of NYPL's Freedom to Read campaign. Thank you to everyone joining us today. At the New York Public Library, we believe in the freedom to read. We started this banned book club in response to the alarming rise in book bans and challenges across the country. The American Library Association recently reported that in 2023, the US saw the highest number of book challenges since they started keeping records more than 20 years ago. The majority of these banned or challenged books are for young people, and many feature LGBTQ plus characters, as well characters of color. As the largest public library system in the country, the New York Public Library stands united with the American Library Association and libraries across the country against banned books. Through the Banned Book Club and our Freedom to Read campaign, we are elevating and amplifying the important stories, voices, and titles that censorship attempts to silence. Thanks to this campaign, NYPL cardholders can check out a digital copy of Go with the Flow without wait times through the end of April. So if you've not yet read the book, you still have another week to get hold of it. If you haven't started yet, we hope you will be inspired to do so by today's event with Lily Williams and Karen Schneemann. Lily Williams is the author and illustrator of many books, including the nonfiction picture book series If Animals Disappeared, and graphic novels Go with the Flow and Look on the Bright Side. She grew up in Northern California and worked in feature animation before moving to Colorado. Lily seeks to inspire change, engage audiences, and educate people of all ages with her artwork. Karen Schneemann grew up in Northern California. She received her first undergraduate degree in engineering from UCLA and her second in animation from California College of the Arts. In addition to being an engineer, artist, and writer, Karen is also a mom to two adorable kids. She lives and works in foggy San Francisco, California. We're delighted to have these folks in conversation today. Give us 1 minute to get everyone situated. Thank you all again for being here, and over to you, Desire.
Thank you, Nasa. Welcome, Lily and Karen, and thank you for joining us for today's Freedom to Read Teen Banned Book Club event. For those that haven't read Go with the Flow, can you give us a brief overview of the book?
Yeah, so for those of you who haven't read Go with the Flow yet, it's a book about four friends who are high school sophomores. And it's mainly about them navigating high school, friendship, and also the physical changes that come with growing up and your body changes. There's a definite bend towards fighting for period equity and period equality, and just normalizing the conversation around menstruation.
Yep, and it's a graphic novel.
I really like what you said about normalizing the conversation about periods, and that kind of brings us into our first question, which is how did you both learn about periods, and why do you think the topic of periods is so taboo?
Yeah, I think like I learned about periods the way many people do, which is through, the your body and health class that you experience in fifth grade. So I learned about it through that. And then obviously my mom taught me more about it. And then through the experience of having a period and getting it earlier than I expected and having period pain and all sorts of things that came with that.
And I had a similar experience. We did study it in school in health class. And then I did talk to my mom mostly about it. Once I realized that all of my friends had gotten it and I'd gotten it, then we started having those conversations. And I think one of the main reasons that it's taboo today is that historically it's kind of been passed along to be that way, right? I think we all kind of internalized growing up that this is something we should feel embarrassed about. In reality, that's not true. It's very normal. But I know when I was growing up, when we had the health class, whenever we had sex education, they would split the girls into one class and the boys into another class, and you would learn two different things, right? And so what's interesting now is that now I have a daughter who's in fifth grade, and she's learning everything all together as one class, which I think is very helpful, because excluding boys or, male identifying people from this conversation makes it really awkward for them to bring it up or even talk about it, because they don't really have that base understanding.
Totally. This is a question for Lily. We touched a little bit on the fact that this book is a graphic novel, opposed to a more formal piece of writing, which leaves much more emphasis on things like the red and pink hues, the characters' facial expressions, panel sizing, for example, one panel occupying the page rather than multiple panels. So we want to know, what effect do these artistic choices have on our understanding of the novel as readers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one of the wonderful things about a graphic novel is that you get to see what you're reading about, and it allows you to have a different sort of literacy, a visual literacy, which is really helpful for taboo topics. One of the things Karen and I met in college, we were going to school for animation, and we took storyboarding classes. So graphic novels really lend itself to storyboarding, and they kind of my storyboarding skills really lent itself to making graphic novels. Writers get to do wonderful things when they're writing more traditional books, where they can think about pacing, they can think about the word choices they use, but graphic novels get to do some of that and also get to have these moments illustrated. So I got to really focus on when and where I wanted to draw your attention. I got to choose red and pink hues for the color of the book. Overall, everything that I got to think about for the artwork only helped push the story forward. And we really wanted to do comics because, like you said earlier, periods are a taboo topic. So getting to have the visual and getting to have the visual literacy of looking at this, experiencing it with the characters, and really seeing a period on a page was something Karen and I felt really strongly about.
That's incredible. I really think that, as I mentioned, the pictures place so much more emphasis on certain things, and it really just brings the story really well together. And so, one of the things on the cover of the book, actually, it says a friendship story, period, which I think friends and obviously periods were go hand in hand and really are what the book is made of. So, our next question is, how do Abby, Britt, and Christine empower Sasha to grow? What does this spread about periods and friendships? And how do you think differing opinions in education about periods impacts perspectives?
Yeah, I think what we wanted to show was that, there is a safe space among friends once you can talk about maybe uncomfortable topics, or maybe something you are embarrassed about or not sure about. And so what we really had in the book is that Abby, Britt, and Christine kind of take Sasha in and give her a safe space to talk, right? Where she doesn't have to be embarrassed and she can ask questions. And maybe she's embarrassed to ask her parents about it, or, she has an older brother, so she doesn't have another girl her age or a female her age that she has at home that maybe she can kind of bounce things off of. So that's what her friends provide at school. And I think it's really important to just identify the need for friendship and for having those open communication paths with people that are, at your level, at your age.
Yeah, one of the things Karen and I talked about a lot was there's sort of this moment in assigned female at birth friendships where you talk about your body, specifically periods, and how your periods are. I just actually had some friends over recently, and we talked about our periods, even as adult women. And this is just sort of this it's like it's a safe space, so you can finally talk about it. Your friends are experiencing maybe something different, so you get to learn about their experiences, or maybe you're the one experiencing something different and you realize that maybe what you're dealing with isn't normal. I credit Karen a lot to her helping me realize like I really needed to fight for myself more in the doctor's office. And then it turns out I, like Britt, have endometriosis, which is something that is dealt with a little bit more in our sequel, Look on the Right Side. So I think to think about Sasha in this, like Karen said, she doesn't have these people at home necessarily to talk about. So her friends are the safe space for her to explore the things she's concerned about, to help her figure out her understanding of the world, especially with how her body fits into it. And as you're growing up, your friends really are that. Your friendship with other people helps you figure out so much about your place in the world and your perspective on what you believe.
That's awesome. I think you guys kind of explored periods in friendship really beautifully and how they come together. We're going to move on to the next question, which talks about kind of just awareness in a way. On pages 244 all the way up until 247, we see Abby vandalize the hallways of her school. She uses red paint to say phrases like periods are bloody awesome and period power. So while I think that vandalism wasn't the best route, and Abby could have spread awareness about periods in a different way, I also see how her actions were both symbolic and powerful at the same time. So I just wanted to get a little bit of insight on kind of your thought process and the intention behind having her make such a big statement. And after that, Lily, for you, we wanted to know what it was like actually drawing that scene and kind of depicting this really powerful moment.
I'll start since Lily can talk about the art after. I think what we really wanted to show with Abby is that, I'm sorry, this cat is just all over me. We really wanted to show with Abby that she's just like this really, she's got that activist soul, right? Like she wants to make a change. She wants she wants things to be better and she wants to make them better. And she's really frustrated as to how to do that. And she's seeing people, she's talking to the administration and she talks to the principal. She kind of just gets turned away and then she goes home, gets kind of stews on it a little bit. And then she's like, I'm going to do something big. And so I think a lot of people have that instinct where they really just get so frustrated. They want to do something that makes a huge impact. And it's not always, it doesn't always come out in the best way, right? Like sometimes you're not making the best decision because you're acting with your heart. And I think we just wanted to show the consequences of that as well in the book.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting because our book is a banned book, and one of the reasons that I've heard that it's banned is actually because of this part of the book where Abby does cause um mischief in a sort of misguided way. And we show that there's actually consequences for your actions at this part of the book. There's no point in which we like undersign what Abby is doing and say that anyone should cause vandalism. We are more exploring the idea, and Abby's showing that like you can, like Karen said, be so passionate about something and not know maybe the best way to go about it. And there's the wonderful thing about growing up is that you can make mistakes, right? It's harder to make mistakes as an adult, but when you're a kid, you're allowed to make mistakes and you're allowed to suffer the consequences of them and then learn and then like figure it out. And so we're showing that Abby is doing that. She doesn't do it right, she doesn't do it perfectly, but she's figuring out like where her voice is, where her activism is, and like how she can use her art to make a difference. And I obviously I'm like did the art in this book, and I feel very passionate about these things too. And this is something like I struggle with. I'm actually like pretty quiet person. So I don't always know like what the best way to go about using my art to make a difference is. So there was some amount of fun that I had, like coming up with the visuals for like what Abby's doing and also making it crazy enough that she would get in trouble, but not so crazy that she causes actual like lasting destruction. Everything she does, it can be washed away or taken down. That was something Karen and I really talked about when we were working on the scene. So Abby does get to like explore this, and she doesn't do it correctly, and there are consequences for her actions. And there was like, it was fun to get to kind of draw these things and have fun with this. I actually like, one of the things that I did in this book is I infused people that I know in this. And there's my sister and her best friend are in this scene, actually, like in the background. So there's another fun fact about that scene.
Another thing I wanted to point out is that she actually also feels consequences from her friend group, right? And so this is something that she came up with on her own. And I think she learned a lesson here that maybe if you have this great idea and you want to make change and you're doing something a little out of your comfort zone, like maybe you should bounce that off some people that you know who can kind of redirect you in a way that makes more sense.
Thank you both for sharing. I find it actually really interesting, Karen, you brushed up on the point that you can kind of feel this like frustration almost in terms of not knowing who to talk to about these things, or when your own needs are kind of disregarded, which I actually find was on pages 114 and 115. It kind of showed up in the book where Sasha's principal kind of disregarded completely the need for restocking the sanitary machines because of their strict budget. Yet they invested that money into the football team jerseys, which I think accurately depicts the nature of school administrators and staff who are kind of placed with like upholding these policies to not prioritize the needs of female students. Was there a particular experience that you hope to shed light on through these pages?
I think we were really hoping, I know Lily and I both read the book Periods Gone Public, which is amazing. It's an adult book, but it talks about all these different policies, right? And how we don't support a lot of women or menstruating people in terms of providing them with these basically sanitary supplies. And so one of the things that we were hoping to change and just bring awareness about is the fact that schools, at the very least, should be providing these things for free. I mean, it is a need pretty akin to the need for toilet paper, right? It's not for everyone, but it is for at least about half the population. And so, I know I've been heartened to see like the news. Every time I see the news about something like this, some state passing a law, it's like just so heartening, right? That we're changing things a little bit. I'm not saying it's due to us, but as a society, things are changing. And I think last time I checked, 28 states, and I think DC also passed laws that require schools to provide in these supplies for people in the bathrooms, which I think is great. And really, I mean, I don't know that there was like a specific incident that we had that we wanted to shed light on, but maybe Lily can weigh in with her thoughts too.
I think it's interesting because when you're writing a book that's fiction, you do take in a lot of nonfiction, your own experiences, and also things like Karen referenced. We took in like a lot of news and books that talk about different injustices. Periods Gone Public, I want to also second that. Fantastic book for anyone who wants to read more on period injustices. And I think that like when you are just a person navigating this world, you do encounter, systems that are meant to sort of keep people down. And maybe the people in power don't realize that when they're like enforcing these things or keeping the status quo, it allows these injustices to sort of perpetuate and just continue. And I think one of the best things you can do as a person is just ask like why? Like why is this happening? Why are we doing it this way? Could we do it a different way? And I think that's like important now, especially more than ever. But with this, I had some really frustrating experiences in school myself. None of them necessarily period related, but I do remember like talking to different teachers or administration and just feeling like, why is this happen? Why is this the way that this is, and why aren't we doing anything to solve it? I did take one of my teachers like head to head and like took him to task and went to the administration about him. And I remember thinking they were like, yeah, he's just that way. And I was like, well, this isn't the way this should be. And I think that like when you're trying to make a point, you have to also show your evidence, right? And so we were showing the evidence as to like why this could be a transformative thing at this school and why maybe it's not happening. So for instance, they use part of the budget that maybe they could have used for this on new football uniforms that had previously just been replaced the year before. And things like this do often happen. We do often see sports and other things where boys or men are the main like beneficiaries, have more funding. So that was just like shining a light on an example of what is an injustice at their school, but what also like can be an injustice just in our everyday lives.
You make a really great point about just the injustices in general. There's a lot of times, even at like my school, where I can think of different scenarios. As you mentioned, they might not always be like period related, but just in general, things are more catered to the boys. And I find that this book does a really great job of kind of like pushing out those issues in a way that's not super. It kind of forces you to think about it and like sit back and reflect, which is great. You talked about how you like used your voice from a pretty early age, and I think this book has also done a really great job of just kind of forcing us to kind of sit deeper and reflect. So with that is that on page 64, where Britt told her teacher that her repeated absences were actually due to headaches opposed to her period, I found that extremely relatable, as much of the book is, in the sense that many girls are hesitant to speak up about their periods. How do you hope that this book will encourage readers to speak up for themselves, be able to communicate their needs, and also advocate and reflect on their personal menstrual care needs?
So that scene was that scene was like a direct, it's like sometimes fiction is inspired by life, and that one was really inspired by before I ended up having endometriosis excision surgery, I just had like some really bad progressive years where my health was getting worse and worse, and I didn't know why, and I didn't have answers. I didn't know there was like a name or anything that was attached to it. But something I've always dealt with was like missing a lot of school, missing a lot of work because of that. And this was inspired by missing several days in a row of work and then coming back. And my supervisor was like, "Where have you been?" And I was like, "Well, I have bad headaches." Which was not true. I mean, now it's true. Now I get migraines, but I didn't at the time. So I was just like, oh yeah, I had headaches, I get migraines. But I didn't at that time. I was just having horrible periods and horrible period cramps. And so, Britt at this point doesn't feel like she can say that, especially to like a male teacher. Can she's relatively new to having periods, right? She's still a kid. But she's clearly missing enough school that it's an issue and people are noticing. And I do teach art now at a public school, and it's hard sometimes when kids are absent. They do miss some of the education you're giving them. So I can also understand the teacher's point of view. So everyone in that situation was just like trying to do the best that they could. The teacher's caring. Britt doesn't know how to respond. But I think like one of the first things that we can do is just make sure that we're being honest about like, yeah, my periods are impacting this. It is taboo, so it's uncomfortable. I can't expect everyone to be able to say that, but part of communicating your needs also is getting comfortable with yourself and your body, and being able to communicate like, yeah, my periods are now impacting my ability to complete my schoolwork or my ability to go to work. That's a huge issue that a lot of people deal with.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, really, like I think I mentioned this at the beginning, but, we're really trying to normalize conversation about menstruation, right? And And just the concept that it's not something to be embarrassed by. Like I still get embarrassed by it sometimes, right? Like sometimes you just in a situation where you're like, I don't think this is going to go well if I bring it up at this point. But the more that people do feel comfortable doing that and do start doing that, then I think people will realize like, oh, this is something that impacts people's lives, and they'll have more space for it and allow, yeah, just more understanding, I think, in general.
I think a support system is really great, and that's one of the topics kind of at the forefront of this book. As a follow up, we wanted to know, what do you guys think is the best way of advocating for others? I think that, as we mentioned, support systems, not everyone always has that, and it was beautiful to see Sasha find that throughout her friends. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, I think we really wanted to show that you can find support systems, you can find camaraderie and community um, anywhere, right? Like if you look for it, you will find it. It may take a while. You may have some stumbles, right? You may try to talk to someone about something and it doesn't go well. But if you keep trying, eventually you're going to find someone who is open to it and does have some similarities for you, or maybe some insight for you, right? Like I know Lily mentioned when we were talking about our periods and about we made like a web comic for a little while. Um, and she was just telling me about all of her struggles and all the pain and cramps and like how long they were lasting. And I was like, are you sure that that's like normal for you? You know, because there is variation, right? And it's important to acknowledge that, but it's also important to know, hey, maybe there is something different, right? Maybe I should go talk to a doctor. Maybe I should push this a little further, because even a lot of doctors will, and Lily knows this firsthand, but will kind of not necessarily doubt you. Sometimes they will doubt you, but sometimes they think maybe you're experiencing pain different than the average person, right? And so they're just like, you're just overreacting to this pain and this is normal. But if you know that it's not normal and you feel that it's not normal, find a second opinion. That's hard to do, right? And you have to have resources to do that, and you have to be able to do that. But I think finding that community, finding friends, I think that's a way to find more resources as well. So yeah, I think I agree. It's really important.
Yeah, something I don't know that we necessarily set out to make like a book also about like found family, but you can find families in your friends, and your friends can sometimes provide pathways to you learning about yourself in different ways. Um, Sometimes your family is not necessarily the exact way you're going to learn about everything, just because of different beliefs and different ways things are taught. And that's not to say any of that is bad. It's just that that's one of the wonderful things that happens as you grow up, you make friends. You might make a few like bad friends, like Karen said, and you might have to like reroute. But ideally, you're finding people that are challenging you in the good ways, like making you think about things differently, but in a safe space. They're supporting you, they're raising you up, they're being kind. And yeah, they like they do with Abby, they challenge her and tell her that she didn't respect the way that they wanted things done. So I think one of the things that it was really easy to write a book about good friendships with one of my best friends, right? Like Karen and I are friends first, and it was really wonderful to be able to tap into that when we're trying to figure out some of the interactions and just try to like reflect good friendships onto the page. Having that basis where you're like making something with one of your best friends it made it really easy to do that.
That's really great. I know we touched a little bit about resources, and you mentioned one of them being the book that you found. Are there any specific resources you guys would recommend to our audience viewing, whether they're navigating their periods for the first time, or even as adults, if this is something they're pretty used to at this point?
I think Periods Gone Public is a great book to just learn about the different period injustices in the world. I'm also going to give a little shout out to Nancy's Nook Endometriosis Education, which is a Facebook group and a website where a former nurse, Nancy, vets endometriosis doctors. And that resource, which was provided to me anonymously from like a random woman on the internet in a Facebook comment thread, like changed my life. And I was able to get surgery. I was able to, like, I will never be rid of endometriosis, much like Britt explains in the second book. She will never be able to be cured of it. But my life is infinitely better because I found Nancy's Nook. And we have that linked as like a resource in the back of our books too.
And Lily and I did, when Go with the Flow first came out, Lily and I did some school talks, and there was a really brave little, I think she was a sixth grader, but a really brave girl who said she was not from the US. Like, she had recently moved here with her dad. Her mom had stayed behind where she was from. And so she said, who am I supposed to talk to about this? Like, I don't know how to talk to my dad about it. He doesn't know about it. And so luckily that school had a wonderful librarian who actually had like period products stashed behind her desk. And she was like, I've got the good stuff, not the cheap stuff. And that was like, I mean, that's a great resource, right? If you know someone who is at your school, who is open to talk about this stuff, is willing to share, you can rely on friends a lot too. I know, I did actually bleed through my pants once and went home and thought, I missed a day of school for it. And so I was like, I will always have a backpack full of supplies. So that's another thing too, where ask your friends, if you forget, or if you don't have the funds, or, you just didn't, couldn't find them in the bathrooms because they're out, or, maybe they're in a state that they're not supplied. Ask your friends, ask around, it's like community sourced healthcare. We got to take care of ourselves as well and kind of build that community and understanding. I think it should be regulated by and provided by bigger institutions. And it should be something that's just provided for students. But when that's lacking, do what you can.
I was just going to add, like, often librarians and nurses, especially if you're in a school situation, tend to be great places for information and also for like actual period products. So definitely, if you know of a trusted adult, if you're in a school setting, definitely talk to them if you can't find that information anywhere else.
I think it's great that you mentioned this. I actually have my dean. We're lucky enough that as a man, even he has these products for us, and he's made it super clear that they're just always available, which I think you guys mentioned. And it's just great to touch on that. Even when these things, aren't for your own use, you have them available to the community and to who does need them. Which brings us perfectly into our next question, continuing on with the topic of community and friendships and all that we've discussed thus far. What was behind the choice of motivating and mainly positive representations of the families of girls with periods? I really enjoyed the different perspectives within the friend group, although I'd like to hear more about what it might be like the perspective from a family that has a different view about period practices due to maybe social or religious reasons.
Yeah, we made sure all the families were different because one of the things Karen and I really talked about is like reflecting the people around us, all of our friends in the book and all of their experiences and all of what their families look like. So all of the families are different. And while we personally cannot always speak to every other experience or every other family experience, we did try to have as much diversity in the families as possible. I know that periods weren't always like a super positive thing in not my immediate family, but in my extended family. And I have had family members who didn't know that that was coming and then experienced it for the first time. And the amount of shame and fear that they felt did factor into how we showed some of Sasha's experience. Not in its entirely, but just like a taste of it. So there's like some different amounts of positivity and different amounts of support that their families give them that then we also tried to like reflect maybe in a more positive way in the friendships.
Yeah, and I think we also want to leave space for other authors, right? I mean, it would be great if we get more books about menstruation and different experiences. I mean, I really hope that happens. I want to read them. I don't think we felt comfortable speaking too much into experiences that we were not that familiar with, and so there's a space there. So hopefully, we're inspiring some other authors or graphic novelists out there.
Yeah, though we can't write every book about periods. And luckily there's like a bunch of other ones like The Moon and More and Code Red. So there are ones in existence now. And I think the more period books, the better. So yeah, like Karen said, we would encourage anyone who has maybe an experience that they feel like would be well represented on the page to share that.
And I'm seeing it more in TV shows and movies, like even representation of the actual blood, which is like, I don't feel like I've ever seen that before until recently. And so they're adult shows and adult movies, but I just hope there's more and just normalize that, which is exciting.
Yeah, really quickly, you touched on the fact that the book was kind of inspired by maybe people you knew or just things that you had kind of some background knowledge with. What was the like research like, and what had to go into actually taking these stories of your own and maybe your own experiences and implementing them in the book?
That's a good and complicated question. I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying of like life imitates art, and there's often a lot of fact in fiction. So I've said multiple times, but like Brit's experience is like heavily inspired by mine. And one of the things that I had was my endometriosis excision surgery actually while we were on deadline for the book. Um, and our editor was wonderful because we were able to adjust some of the dialogue actually, because I finally got like a name for this issue that I've had my whole life. Well, since I had my period. And we were able to like give Brit that name. And there's power to giving that name to this issue, which before it was kind of nebulous. Like I didn't know what was happening with me, so Brit didn't know what was happening with her. Um, but like all the girls have, whether you completely experience it or not, have different like you as a reader see that they all have different period experiences, and those are inspired by us and our friends and like the people around us and the experience we had with like our friends growing up. I remember I had one friend who she didn't get her period till really late. And, that did inspire Sasha's story. And I don't know if that woman will ever know that, but, it was something that we talked about a lot because she was like, when's it gonna come? Like, I'm high school's coming to an end, and so there are these things that you experience as just a person with friends that we were able to kind of like draw from and put into the book in ways that are fiction. They're fictionalized in the book, but there are nuggets of truth in a lot of things that fiction writers write about.
And I think something that, so this isn't necessarily period related, but I think what we tried to do with the book was to make it genuinely interesting to read. And so we wanted to put all aspects of their lives and what they're doing in school and with each other and at home into the book. And so we could pull on a lot of our experiences with other things as well. And I know in particular when Christine, Ted asked her if she wants to study with him, and she's like, but I got like 100%. Like, I don't need to study with you. I feel like that's a very common thing that people run into. I know that I got a certain like response from people that were like, well, you're a girl, you're not good at math kind of thing. Which I think if you add those little tidbits, it's really fun to like work from your own experience and kind of like Lily was saying, fictionalize those experiences and put them into a narrative. Yeah, so I think it just adds to the believability of the characters.
Yeah, I just did like a week's series of school talks 2 weeks ago, and one of the things I like always tell kids is like, you are the only you, and you are experiencing all these things that like I might not ever experience. And likewise, I've experienced a lot of things that many people might also not experience. And so being able to like draw upon those things to put in a book allows other people who maybe are experiencing them, but like slightly differently, or maybe very similarly, or maybe never having seen them at all, they can learn or relate to those things that you're sharing. So it's important to remember that like as people, we all have unique experiences, but also a lot of things that are really relatable, and that like we might be the right person to talk about that. And that was something that Karen and I we had talked about. We're like, wouldn't it be great if someone made a comic about periods? And then we were kind of like, I think we have to make the comic about periods, which was like actually a little nerve-wracking at first to be like, okay, I guess we're gonna do this. Okay, what does that mean? But we were able to be like, yeah, we do really want this thing to exist, and we've experienced all these things, so we might as well be the people to make this exist.
I think the concept of representation is really, really important in a lot of the work that I do as a teen reading ambassador. When we have to recommend like books to kids, we talk about mirrors and windows, and it's just the concept that we can find ourselves and feel like represented, and also just kind of validated in what we're experiencing, which I think um, Go with the Flow does a great job of. And with that being said, we're going to move in. Not always so kind to us or very understanding people who are experiencing their periods for the first time. And the second part of that is, how do you hope that your graphic novel will help readers around the world that identify with Sasha, Christine, Abby, and Britt?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that I really hope for Go with the Flow is that it just makes people realize that they're normal. Even if there is something like endometriosis where, your period is not normal, you are a normal human. This is within the normal human range of things. So it's not something to be embarrassed about. Um, find people who may be experiencing the same thing or something similar, or just that understand. Like you said, even your dean, who's a man, has empathy for you, right? Or like understands enough to know that this is something that's needed and be able to provide that. And I think I just want people to not be afraid to reach out, like not to be embarrassed and feel like there's something weird about them or something too different and they don't want anyone to know. Like it's not shameful, it's not a secret, it's natural.
I think Karen answered that so well.
Thank you guys thus far. We have actually made it to our last question. Our event wraps up with your book being available to NYPL cardholders who want to read it for free without waiting. Can you talk about what that means in a time when a lot of books are being banned and access is heavily restricted?
Take it, Lily.
Okay, yeah. So I think book banning mostly affects marginalized communities. It mostly affects people of color, girls, and people who might not always see themselves represented in media, right? So it's really important now more than ever for people to have access to banned books, and for bands to not be successful. I don't know the answers as to how that would work, but book banning is really alarming. Everyone should be able to have access to all the information that they would like to have access to. And also in the age where it's harder to use the internet to just search for simple things, and information is being told as being correct without necessarily being true, it's important to be able to fact check. So, I think that I just want to give like a little shout out to editors and copy editors who fact check books. If you're reading a book that's at a library, like 99.9% of the time, it is fact-checked by more people than just the authors and the illustrators. So now more than ever, it's really important for all different people to have access to all different books. And we are like so honored and grateful to the New York Public Library for having us to be able to answer these questions, to talk about this in a really accessible way with anyone who's interested in learning about this and then who's interested in reading. And I just want to give like everyone here like a really big thank you for showing up and for asking the questions and for being like so curious about the world that you want to have access to books and learning about different people and different experiences and maybe even your own experience.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with Lily. I think you also mentioned that, it's really important to see representation of someone who looks like you or someone who lives like you. And I think narrowing that down and policing knowledge and policing what's available to kids growing up or even to adults is just so dangerous, right? Because it narrows your point of view, your perspective on the world. And books, like if you can't travel the world and meet people from all these different cultures, books provide that, right? Like you're saying, windows and mirrors, right? You want to see yourself and know that you're validated, what you feel is valid. But then you also want to see how do other people live and build that empathy towards different cultures and different ways of life. And books are such an easy way to do that. And libraries are so important. And I love that the New York Public Library is doing this. And like Lily said, it's a huge honor that our book was included here.
Thank you so much for joining the conversation today. Thank you so much, Lily and Karen, and thank you, Desire. If you're looking for another amazing read, the next title in NYPL's Teen Band Book Club is now available without wait times to NYPL cardholders. That's The Magic Fish by Trung Lee Noon, which we're excited to be discussing with the author at a special virtual event on June 3rd. All are welcome to join us. Just head over to nypl.org/band book club for more details.